Imagine waking up one day and realizing everything you've ever believed about life, the world, even yourself, is just part of a game, a giant trick to keep you confused and scared. That's what Mary Magdalene's gospel teaches us. But Mary Magdalene knew that wasn't just about religion. It was about everything. The world we live in, the one you and I know so well, isn't what it seems. It's not real. It's a kind of illusion, a trick that keeps us stuck here, not knowing the real truth. If we fail to discover an escape route, this illusion will ensnare us indefinitely. And here's Jesus, giving his deepest, most powerful teachings to a woman. You can bet this made a lot of people really uncomfortable. They couldn't let the world know. So what did they do? They hid it. They banned the gospel. They erased it so no one would know Mary was the key to escaping this world. An ancient book, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, hid this secret. She wasn't just any follower of Jesus, she was special. She had a unique understanding that no one else possessed, but the people who controlled the church didn't like that. See, after Jesus left, people expected his disciple Peter to take charge, right? But what they didn't tell you is that Jesus chose Mary Magdalene to share his most important lessons. Not Peter, not the other men. After Jesus' death, a huge battle was happening, one that wasn't fought with swords, but with ideas. You see, during those early days, people were trying to figure out who would lead this new faith. Most people expected Peter or one of the other male disciples to step up. But here's the surprising part. Jesus had actually chosen Mary Magdalene to carry his most important teachings. The early leaders of the church didn't like the idea of a woman having this much power. They feared that if people listened to Mary, their control over the growing Christian movement would be at risk. So, they did something drastic. They banned her gospel. The gospel of Mary Magdalene was considered too dangerous. Why? It refuted the notion that individuals must adhere to religious leaders for salvation. Instead, it taught that every individual could find the truth on their own, without the church's help. Imagine how powerful that idea was back then. At the time, the early church was trying to establish itself as the ultimate authority. They claimed that the only way to reach salvation was through the church, and they used fear, particularly the fear of sin, to control people. Sin was this huge concept that meant you were born broken, and only the church could fix you. But the gospel of Mary Magdalene shattered that idea. Unlike the early church, this gospel, which was on the verge of extinction, did not discuss sin. In fact, it taught that sin didn't even exist. Mary's teachings posited that sin merely served as a tool for controlling people. The real problem wasn't sin, it was ignorance. We are unaware of our true selves and the true nature of the world. After centuries of being hidden, fragments of this forbidden gospel were found in Egypt, in a place called Akhmim. Imagine the excitement when people realized that this wasn't just a forgotten piece of history, but a missing link that could change the way we understand Christianity. Later in 1945, an excavation in Nag Hammadi uncovered more fragments and other hidden ancient texts. The teachings in this gospel were completely different from the ones promoted by the early church. Mary's gospel taught that salvation came through knowledge, through understanding the deeper truths about life, the world, and yourself. Though spiritual, this understanding could free you from the illusion of the material world. According to Mary's gospel, the material world, the one we can see, touch, and feel, was not the true reality. It was like a veil, something that covered up the deeper spiritual truth. The frightening aspect is that if you continued to remain ignorant, you would remain trapped in that delusion for eternity. The early church couldn't afford to let this message spread. If people realized they didn't need the church to find spiritual truth, the church's power would crumble. That's why they suppressed Mary's teachings and tried to erase her from history. But, as we've learned, the truth has a way of coming back. And now we're discovering that Mary Magdalene's message wasn't just revolutionary for its time. It's revolutionary for us today. The idea that sin doesn't exist and that we are not inherently flawed is a message that directly challenges the fear-driven control of religious authority. It's a message that empowers you to find your own spiritual path, to seek knowledge and truth for yourself, without the need for intermediaries. The early church leaders were afraid of this knowledge because it would free people from their grasp. They wanted to be the gatekeepers to salvation, but Mary's gospel flipped that idea upside down. Mary's gospel teaches something completely different from what the early church wanted people to believe. While the church insisted that salvation could only come through obedience to its teachings, Mary said something radical. You don't need the church to find spiritual truth. The truth, she taught, is already inside of you. We call this concept spiritual autonomy, the belief that every individual can find their own path to enlightenment, independent of religious authority. This was a direct challenge to the religious authority of the time. The early church leaders claimed that they were the only ones who could lead people to salvation. They set themselves up as the middlemen between people and God. They used fear to maintain control, particularly the fear of sin. They instilled in the people the belief that they were inherently sinful and that salvation and forgiveness could only come from adhering to the church's rules. But here's where Mary Magdalene's teachings turn everything upside down. She taught that sin wasn't real. According to her gospel, what truly holds people back isn't sin, it's ignorance. People are unaware of the profound spiritual reality of the cosmos. Instead of needing forgiveness for imaginary sins, people needed to wake up and realize the truth about themselves and the world around them. This message was dangerous to the church's power because it took away their control. The church would lose its authority over people if they began to believe they didn't need the church for salvation. The church depended on being the gatekeeper to salvation, but Mary's gospel said, you don't need a gatekeeper. You already have everything you need inside of you. People constantly lived in fear, questioning if they were good enough for salvation. Religious leaders instructed them to blindly follow them, believing it was the only way to secure their place in the afterlife. But Mary's teachings offered a completely different perspective. She said that salvation wasn't about following rules or listening to religious leaders. Knowing the truth about yourself and the world was key. The church taught that salvation was something that came from outside of you, something only they could give you if you followed their rules. But Mary taught that salvation was something you could find on your own by understanding the deeper truths of the universe. You didn't need a church, a priest, or any other authority figure to find it. You had the power to free yourself. This idea of spiritual autonomy is incredibly empowering because it means that no one else gets to decide your spiritual journey for you. It means that you are in control of your own spiritual path. The early church wanted to control people through fear and obedience, but Mary's gospel tells us that we have the ability to break free from that control. We don't need to live in fear of sin or punishment. We don't need to follow someone else's rules to find the truth. We have the power to discover it for ourselves. But this kind of freedom comes with a challenge. It's up to you to find the truth without religious leaders. You must be prepared to delve deeper, challenge everything you've learned, and delve into your own mind and spirit. It's not an easy path, but it's a path that leads to true spiritual liberation. What Mary Magdalene's gospel shows us is that the greatest obstacle to spiritual freedom isn't sin, but the false belief that we are powerless without religious authority. The truth is, we are not powerless. We have the ability to find our own way. The early church didn't want people to know this because it would mean they could no longer control them. But now, with Mary's gospel uncovered, we can see that the power to break free from fear and ignorance has been with us all along. Mary's gospel doesn't just talk about religious ideas. It goes much deeper. It teaches that the material world we live in isn't the ultimate reality. The things we can see, touch, and feel are just like shadows on the wall of a cave, masking a much greater truth. According to this hidden gospel, the physical world is a veil, something that tricks us into thinking it's all there is. But if we don't look beyond it, we stay stuck, trapped in an illusion. In Mary's teachings, she explains that what we see in our everyday lives isn't the full picture. There's more to existence than the physical objects and sensations we experience. The material world, this thing we think of as reality, is actually temporary. It's not the real, lasting truth. And as long as we believe it's the only thing that matters, we stay stuck in a cycle of fear, confusion, and suffering. Every day, external factors surround us, focusing on our possessions, desires, and the opinions of others. We learn to associate success, happiness, and meaning with material possessions and power. But Mary's Gospel warns us that this focus on the material keeps us from seeing the spiritual truth that lies beneath the surface. Therefore, the more we pursue material things, the further we get from understanding ourselves. The illusion of the material world traps us in a web of desires and fears, making us think we are separate from the real source of life. But according to Mary, this couldn't be further from the truth. The material world is like a mask. And once we learn to look behind it, we can see that we are all part of something much greater, a universal spiritual reality that connects everything. Modern science, especially quantum physics, has begun to uncover similar concepts. At the smallest levels, scientists are discovering that energy, not solid matter, constitutes everything in the universe. What we think of as physical reality is actually more like waves and vibrations, always changing, always connected. In fact, some quantum physicists suggest that our consciousness, our ability to perceive and understand the world, deeply influences what we call reality. She said that the key to escaping the illusion of the material world is knowledge, not the kind of knowledge you get from books or schools, but a deeper understanding of the spiritual truths that lie beyond the physical. Once you see through the illusion, you begin to understand that everything is connected, that the material world is just a temporary experience, and that there is a greater reality beyond what we can see. It doesn't mean running away from life or avoiding the things around us. In reality, it means realizing that the material world isn't everything. It means recognizing that we are part of something larger, something spiritual and eternal. Once we understand this truth, fear, desire, and the endless pursuit of material things no longer control us. Instead of constantly chasing after things that don't last, money, fame, power, you could focus on what really matters, understanding the deeper meaning of life and connecting with the spiritual reality that unites everything. The early church didn't want people to know about this. They wanted to keep control by making people believe that the material world, with all its rules and restrictions, was the most important thing. But Mary Magdalene's Gospel shows us that there is another way. There is a way to rise above the illusion, to see the truth for ourselves, and to find the freedom that comes from spiritual awareness. What Mary Magdalene shared wasn't a simple set of religious rules. It was something much more profound. She showed us that the material world we live in, the world we think is so solid and unchangeable, is just a fleeting illusion. Behind it lies a deeper spiritual reality that connects everything and everyone. And the key to accessing that reality isn't through obeying external laws or relying on religious leaders, but through inner understanding and self-awareness. We all get caught up in the distractions of daily life, the pursuit of money, status, and approval from others. But Mary's teachings remind us that these things are temporary. They are part of the illusion, and if we focus too much on them, we lose sight of what's real. If you're finding value in uncovering these hidden truths and exploring the deepest mysteries of the universe, now's your chance to help keep this journey going. By clicking the Super Thanks button below, you're supporting the creation of content that reveals the knowledge they've tried to bury. Your support is helping spread these powerful insights to others, awakening them to the bigger picture and bringing more people closer to spiritual freedom. The truth is, you have the power to see beyond the surface. You understand that life is more than it appears. Mary Magdalene's Gospel calls us to wake up, to break free from the beliefs and fears that keep us trapped in a limited understanding of the world. Once we realize that the material world is not the full picture, we can start living with a sense of freedom and purpose that we've never experienced before. Remember, this journey requires courage. It entails challenging everything you've learned and delving deeper than you've ever done before. The early church wanted to control people through fear, especially the fear of sin. They aimed to maintain the belief that you were flawed and required salvation from another person. But Mary's gospel tells a different story. It asserts that you're not flawed. Rather, you're simply oblivious. And once you become aware, you don't need anyone to save you. You can save yourself through knowledge and understanding. This is the secret the church didn't want you to know. The truth is already within you. The power to rise above the illusions of this world and see things as they really are is something you've always had. You don't need to follow rules set by others to find it. You just need to open your eyes and seek the deeper truths for yourself. The choice is yours, but one thing is for sure. Once you start seeing the world for what it really is, there's no going back. You'll never see life the same way again. The teachings of Mary Magdalene invite us to challenge everything we think we know and to seek a truth that goes far beyond the material world. The journey may be difficult, but it's one that leads to a deeper, more meaningful existence. Subscribe to our channel and join this growing community of seekers, uncovering the truth and stepping beyond the illusion of the material world. Until the next video.